Hey y'all, and welcome back to my channel. In this tutorial we are going to be doing another floral peekaboo, but a completely different design. And the best thing about this is those florals are decals. It is not a print and cut. This has quite a few steps, so I have already glittered and epoxied my tumbler and it is ready for my stencils. So we're jumping right into creating these stencils. I have my floral designs and I made them slightly bigger, about 1/2 inch to 1 inch larger than the circumference of the cup. We are using a 30-ounce straight from PARISH tumblers, so I made them 11 inches wide. I added in a square shape and then unlocked the little lock by the dimensions and made that 11.5 inches by 0.10 inches. Now when measuring my tumbler, the florals that we are using, I wanted to make sure that they did not overlap the side of the tumbler. So I measured with the florals on the top and the bottom, and you'll see here in just a bit what I'm talking about, and then measured the center piece that was exposed in between them, which was roughly about 2 inches. I needed to allow some wiggle room as well as space for our additional stripes that we are going to layer on. So I made this about 1.25 inches to go in the center of my tumbler. I cut these out and we were ready to apply our stencils. I used my high-tech measuring device to mark the center of my tumbler off. It doesn't matter how you measure as long as you mark a point in the center of your tumbler so that you can apply your stencil directly in the center, and everything is going to be proportionate from that. We have 6 stripes, so I aligned that dot directly in the center of them. I exposed a little bit of the vinyl, so once I had that lined up, I could just press the vinyl down and then easily work my way around the tumbler with my little squeegee tool, and it would be aligned perfectly. Not to anyone's surprise, but my Cricut machine has just completely went crazy since the last update. It's cutting slow as molasses, y'all, and it drives me insane, and it is cutting a lot deeper than what I'm putting in. Hopefully an update fixes that, but these stripes cut way too deep, so when I weeded them, the ends just kind of frayed and they were not straight at all. So here I am just lining them up by hand to make sure that I will not be able to see where the seams are once we apply or remove them from our spray paint. Once those are in position, I'm going to take some painter's tape and go straight over them just to cover them up so that we can add on our additional stencils and trim off that excess, and it is not going to affect our center stripes. I mentioned earlier that I wanted to give plenty of room for my florals. Here is this gorgeous sheet of florals that I collaborated again with Gracefully Created. I wanted to double check before I added on these larger stencils to make sure that they were not going to go over the top or the bottom rim. Now, these stencils gave me the hardest time. I poked my fingers a couple of times with the weeding tool. I'm not good with needles. So I got annoyed and I said, okay, I'm just going to weed it from the tumbler. So I applied this on, and then it took forever to weed it from the tumbler. So on the second one, you'll see it is completely weeded before we add it on. But super simple. All I did was go below that piece of painter's tape and apply my stencil. It does overlap, and that is why we covered up our stripes. We did make it a little bit larger than the circumference of the tumbler, so where the pieces come together on the back side, it does overlap just a little bit, and all of the little pieces that are up on that painter's tape, we can reposition them to the back side as well to help fill in that gap. This is a temporary vinyl. You do not want to use permanent for this step. Using permanent vinyl can leave a residue behind and it is super hard to weed. You can also use a stencil vinyl. I just don't use it just because it is a lot more costly than getting a cheap roll of temporary vinyl for this. However, it is much easier to weed once you have applied your spray paint for your peekaboos, so that is definitely an option as well. Once I spent what felt like eternity on weeding that bottom stencil, I moved up to the top and just repeated the same steps. And I have no clue why this vinyl gave me so much trouble. This is a new sheet of transfer tape and it is stickier than the last roll that I had, and I have a lot of trouble with this, with the temporary vinyl not sticking to the tumbler, probably because it's sanded and my transfer tape is even stickier than before. So once I had that transfer tape removed, I just went back and cut off any parts that may have been sort of ripped or pulled off by that transfer tape, and then reposition some of them to fill in that gap. Once I finished my floral stencils, I took my knife and went around the edges of my painter's tape and trimmed all of the pieces that were overlapping. Once I trimmed around, I just grabbed that little piece that I had folded over and removed that tape, and we have a perfect line in the center. Now, if you didn't want to do the stripes, you can definitely take the two pieces of floral stencils and just have them sort of meet in the middle instead of those stripes, and it will look just as beautiful. We are taking burnt sienna from Rust-Oleum and classic gray from Krylon, and we are going to work on our ombre. I'm sorry I did go off camera a couple of times. I was having a hard time holding my tumbler up, and honestly I have no clue why I started at the bottom there for a second, but the main goal was to take this orange and go through the center and give really good coverage. You want to stay about 2 feet or 1.5 feet away from your tumbler and spritz your paint on. You cannot get a good ombre by being super close to your tumbler, so the idea is to lightly dust your tumbler and build up the coverage. So I went in with that burnt orange, and then I come in with my gray, almost covering up that orange, but you can't see on camera, there is a little bit of that orange peeking through right there in the center. And the goal is to make sure that our tumbler is completely covered on those first rounds, and then when we go back in with our second layer of paint, then we can really blend them together. And you want to do this all in one session. You don't want to allow that first coat to dry and then go in with the second. When you have wet paint and you are blending a couple or a few colors together, if it is wet, those colors sort of blend themselves together, so you get an even better ombre without seeing those little spray paint dots. It just sort of melts together on the tumbler. And where you see the ombre parts, I am holding my spray paint can really far back and just allowing those little particles of color to touch the cup. And then when I get to the last spray of the gray for the top and the bottom, I hold it almost as if I was doing a glitter ombre, so that the paint sort of sprays into the center of the tumbler, making that perfect ombre. Once our spray painting is finished, I'm going to set that to the side and allow it to dry for about an hour before I move in to removing my stencils. I want to give it a good dry time because if you apply too much pressure to paint that is wet underneath, it may be dry to the touch on top, but once you apply some pressure or roll it around on your table to remove those stencils, then you will have some fingerprints, or the wet paint underneath will cause it to smear. We did lots of spray paint, so I want to give this some time to dry. I removed all of the stencils, the stripes, and the florals, and then I put one coat of Artistry's 1:1 ratio fast set over top of this to get it ready for our florals. And truthfully, at this point, I really thought about just adding some stripes in the center and calling this good and making another, because that ombre is so beautiful and that peekaboo with the mint is just perfection, and I never imagined these colors would go so well together. Which reminds me, I forgot to tell you that the base of this tumbler is Sea Mist, which is a mint color from Rust-Oleum, and that gorgeous glitter that we used on top is Sea Glass from PDB Creative Studios. Sea Glass is an opal, which allows your base colors to peek through. There are 3 of these floral strips on each sheet from Gracefully Created. I trimmed one of them off and then just worked my way around the tumbler slightly above that top peekaboo stripe that we have in the center. I trimmed off a tiny bit of that backing before I applied them to the tumbler so I could line it up perfectly and get it straight the very first time. If not, that is totally fine, because this is removable vinyl, so you can peel it up and reposition without damaging your florals. I had one little piece that sort of stretched out a little bit too much while I was working my way around, so I just trimmed it off, and then we repeated the same steps on the bottom portion of the tumbler. Now, these florals will release on gracefullycreatedccd.com on Monday, May 9th. I will link her website and her group down below so that you can join and get updates on when these first hit the site. We are working on growing the Brittany Barnes collection, so if you go to her website, click menu, then click collection, and then scroll down to Brittany Barnes, and you will find all of the florals that we have worked together on. Now, once we have our florals on, just make sure that they are pressed down really, really well so that you cannot see that clear vinyl underneath your epoxy. And I did start my florals on the same side to try to line them up as best as possible, so when I apply my painter's tape, I can apply it to one area and cut one single straight seam. I trimmed down the side of my painter's tape and then removed the excess on top and the little bit that was underneath of my floral vinyl. Once you have all that removed, just make sure that your seams are pressed down really well as well. You don't want any of that lifting when you apply your epoxy. I grabbed my vinyl trimmer and my textured silver vinyl from TeckWrapcraft. Again, my Cricut machine was having some issues and it would have took a solid 15 minutes to cut out 4 stripes, so we're just doing it by hand. I cut them roughly 0.12 inches, maybe 0.15. The sage or green colored vinyl is also from TeckWrapcraft. This is a matte color permanent vinyl, and I absolutely love that they put that protective covering over their matte vinyl to make sure it's not scuffed up before you do use it. I cut those strips to about 0.08 to 0.10. I wasn't too particular, I just wanted them to be slightly bigger than the stripes in the center and just a tiny bit of that silver to peek through the sides of my sage. And as you can see, there was a greater distance on the bottom than there is on the top. I did that because I wanted the florals to be the same distance from the top and the bottom of my tumbler, and I knew that I could fill in any offset gap with these stripes going around the center. Once I had them in position, I pressed them down really well, trimmed a little seam, and then pulled out any excess underneath. Normally I would not do that with this textured vinyl, but since we are layering another vinyl on top of this, I want it to be seamless so there's not any little bumps that are noticeable underneath that top vinyl. Now, since we did add on multiple layers of vinyl, I put one thin coat of Artistry's 1:1 ratio fast set over top of all of that before we added on our final decal. I am layering 3 colors of vinyl so it stands out quite a bit from those floral designs. The top is a pretty pastel purple. The center is the textured silver, and then for the final and largest of the offsets is our sage. All 3 from TeckWrapcraft. I absolutely love this vinyl. I have used it in all of my tutorials recently. The 2 matte vinyls that I am using is from one of their sample collections, and I will list that down below for y'all. And for the offset, I just imported the Blessed Mama, which I created, and I will post that for free in my Brittany Barnes Boutique Tumblr art group. So join there and check the files at the top of the group. But I imported that into my Cricut program, created an offset of 0.035. Then I clicked on the offset and created another offset of 0.035. I added a coat of Artistry's 1:1 ratio fast set epoxy. It dries incredibly fast, so after 45 minutes, I went in with my final layer of Artistry's regular epoxy. No sanding was needed since we did that prior to adding on our spray painting ombre. This tumbler was complete. I don't know what it is about this tumbler, but I am so in love with it. This has got to be one of my favorites, or maybe even my favorite tumbler I have ever made, even topping that Floral Peekaboo Mama tumbler. Like, I love it. And I hope y'all do as well. Of course, all the materials that I used in this tutorial will be listed down below in the description. And don't forget that these florals will be released at GRACEFULLYCreatedCCD.com on May 9th. Join our Facebook group for that free file, and we also have a huge 10K subscriber giveaway going on in my group right now. Like this tutorial and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell in the corner to be notified anytime a new tutorial drops. That is all for today. We'll see you next time.